Hey everybody, my name is Alex, and this is Bento Radio. Now, before we get started, the usual podcast stuff, and that is, if you really like this show, be sure to subscribe to it wherever you're getting it. If you're getting it here on YouTube, you can subscribe down below by hitting the subscribe button, as well as the bell, so your new episodes drop. Although, if you're curious, those new episodes usually drop around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every week. And if you are listening to this in whatever podcast app you prefer, you can subscribe to me there. And if you absolutely love the podcast there, I encourage you to give it a 5-star rating. And I also encourage you to like the episodes on YouTube now that I think about it. But on that note, if you really absolutely can't get enough of the podcast, you can check out the podcast website, which is bento-box.ghost.io, and you can do a couple things over there. You can read a whole bunch of little things I wrote to go along with different episodes of the podcast. I am not current because I am only one man, but there are a bunch of posts there over there that correlate with a bunch of episodes of the podcast, and they have the videos embedded, so you can check them out right there. But there are also a couple articles up over there in August. Even if I don't have press credentials, although I'm hoping I do, because it just gives me more access, also a place to sit when I'm tired, because I'm an old man. We'll get to that in a second. I will be putting up my kind of yearly check-in on Anime NYC at a convention and all that fun jazz, and I always look forward to doing that, and that stuff will go up over on bento-box.ghost.io. And that link is in the description of this podcast if you're listening to it or you're watching it. It's also in the description of the YouTube channel. It's in the description of the podcast proper. So it's everywhere for you to find and click and go to. The last thing you can do over there, though, is you can download the beta of my watchlist app, which I am calling Bento Watch, and is focused around being a kind of critical take on a watchlist app, meaning you can take notes on literally every episode that you watch of a show inside of like an episode of that show, essentially. If that interests you, or you want to maybe think a little bit more about what you're watching, or keep a little bit of track of your thoughts about what you're watching, you can definitely go give that a try if you have a iOS device that's not on Android currently. But, because once again, I'm only one man. But on that note, if you are been listening to the podcast for a while, this is going to be a little bit of an odder episode. But if you haven't and you want to start on something more normal, I encourage you to go to bento-box.ghost.io and poke around and see what you find, or even go to the YouTube channel page and see what you find and see what interests you. But without further ado, let's get into what we're talking about this week, and that is the Crunchyroll Anime Awards. So I would normally just kick it over to I here if I don't see a need for that, so let's jump into it in a second. Now, the thing about award shows is that they are, in my mind, they're done for a trio of reasons. They're done for prestige, they're done for notoriety, and they're done for publicity. And what I mean there is, if you look at something like the Oscars as an example, people always use, the Oscars gives prestige to the entire industry of filmmaking. It gives notoriety to the winners via the movies, soundtracks, actors especially. That's why when somebody's nominated for an actor, they become for Best Actor or Supporting Actor, you see after them or before their name all the time. For Oscar-nominated actor, you take your pick, George Clooney. Or Oscar-winning actor, George Clooney. I think George Clooney won a couple Oscars. And the last part, and publicity, I think, will be more important a little later, but the idea of an award show is great for honoring the people at the award show, but it does maximum good for those people if it's televised, if you all see it. So the best way you can think about this is notoriously one of the most corrupt award shows, although I'm sure there's all kinds of sketchy stuff happening, is the Emmys. And at its lowest point, the Emmys was not even being televised. It was essentially being live tweeted out of a hotel in LA somewhere. And it very quickly came back to TV because the point isn't necessarily just to throw the big party, although all the actors and stuff love the big party, but there's plenty of parties that can be had for that stuff. The point is, to give people their flowers on stage and give them something to aspire to. And actually, when I was originally coming up with my list of 3, setting an aspirational goal for actors and filmmakers and people in the craft of the industry of what you're doing was pretty high up on that list. That's what I really mean by prestige, by the second one, what I'm talking about. Go figure. But in doing that, you create a goal point for people to hit. So that's why you see awards in all kinds of things. I used to be in the world, I'm not anymore, in the world of advertising and design, and if you won one of those awards, that meant that you got better jobs, you got better paying and more trusting clients. And so that was a thing that people aspired to, and the people who won those awards became luminaries in the industry. And occasionally you get members of the design and creative industries who would really make themselves just available at different events. I distinctly remember hanging out and defacing Art Director Club award books with the winner of that award at a random party that the Art Director Club threw years ago. A guy named James Victor, he's a very famous designer. But he just signed one here and gave it to me, and I'm like, I still have it somewhere, it's gold. But the point is that you want to award shows want to create an air of prestige and pomp and circumstance for the industry that they're for. And they want to create an aspirational goal for the people in that industry, like a pinnacle they can reach, a prize, and very often a cash prize involved with it that they can reach. And they want to create publicity for that industry. This is why even things like advertising have awards. And I'm saying all this to set up my thoughts about the Crunchyroll Award, which actually I didn't vote in or watch this year, but from what I've gathered, I don't need to. And I haven't felt the reason to watch it for a while. Because I think that when Crunchyroll came up with the awards, their head was in the right place. But I think it so quickly spiraled into speedrunning the worst problems of a lot of different award shows. So, let's break this down here. It wants to be awards are for the prestige of the industry that they're giving awards to. The Crunchyroll Awards want to set up a prestigious way for directors to win awards. But I can't remember seeing, this director won the Crunchyroll Director of the Year Award, and he's doing this new show. In the way that you see all the time with the Oscars, the Grammys, Grammy Award-winning artist, Oscar Award-winning actor, Emmy Award-winning director, that kind of stuff. Even something as nebulous as the People's Choice Award, you still get that prestige with People's Choice for Best Actor 2025 kind of thing. I don't even know if the People's Choice Awards or the Teen Choice Awards are even going. I don't think Teen Choice Awards exist anymore. But that prestige is backing for the other two things. And part of that is the advertising of it afterwards. So a perfect example of this is when the first Into the Spider-Verse, when Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse came out. That was like a ground-shaking thing in animation. It was such a huge deal. If you don't recall it, it hit the animation industry very few things before, and it was just like Japanese animators were obsessed with it, American animators were obsessed with it, graphic designers were obsessed with it. They took all this time to perfect this very specific style, and then they just proceeded to just run full tilt at the wall with it and make an incredible film, an incredible entry into the Spider-Man universe. The second one has complicated that a lot because it has turned on the blood machine, and the working conditions of making that movie were apparently not great, even if that movie is still pretty freaking good. And the style still definitely holds up, and all that legwork they did at the beginning to make that movie look, that now eventually trilogy of movies look the way it's going to look, it's definitely paying off in spades. So much so that the new animated Ninja Turtles movie looks the way it looks because of that. The Weird Dog Cop Kids animated movie looks the way it does because of that. A lot of what you're seeing in particularly American CGI animation, you can trace directly back to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. That's how big of a deal it was. And when they won an Oscar for Best Animated Feature, which was unique because that usually just goes to Pixar, re-released the movie as the Oscar edition. It was a huge deal. They slashed the price so anybody could buy it. And even more people than who saw that movie to begin with saw that movie because it had the Oscar name on it, and they knew that, and they went running with that, and it was worth it to them. And now the team Alan developed that movie initially are probably like our golden children in Sony. Once again, K-pop Demon Hunter. That movie does not look the way it does without Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And if you think it does, you're insane. But my point is that prestige can be attached to the other two things down the line. And I can't think of anything that's been from the Crunchyroll Awards off the top of my head, or even really thinking about it for a couple minutes, that is benefiting in that way. So that's one thing. The next thing, what's called, not prestige, aspiration. These things aren't like, because of what we'll get to later, which is the publicity, and also the voting. The voting is very important here. And the voting and nomination process are two things we'll get to after I go through the first three. But the aspiration part of it doesn't really work because of both the nominating process and the voting process. And I guess I'll talk about these here. In most award shows, there's a nominating committee. And say what you want about how corrupt and how screwed up that is. Generally, the nominating committees are made up of people who have won before. So the one for the Oscar, I think it's called the Academy of Motion Picture Sciences, I think, is the Oscar one. And the deal with that is, if you win an Oscar, not if you're nominated, if you win an Oscar, you are added to the Academy. You go on a list, so anybody who's ever won an Oscar is on a list, and they get screeners. And you used to get all the screeners, everybody used to be able to vote on everything, but they're starting to section it out now because they've noticed the vote amalgamizing and doing things that wasn't good. And the Oscars in particular is really sensitive, or has been tried to be sensitive, to its credit, to people's opinions of what how the last year's Oscars went. And so, in creating a body that knows what it is to win an Oscar, or give that, or direct that film, or that kind of thing, you create a group of people who understand what is Oscar-worthy, who have the closest thing to real authority of what a good thing is. Now, this of course runs into kinks. Notably, the animated feature film section is always screwed up because for many years, I've written an article, actually, it's over on Medium, you have to be like Medium Plus tier to read it, but essentially, much of the Academy has not equipped itself well to figure out, to appreciate or really consider animated films in a meaningful way, unless it's so arresting to them they can't not. And many times what used to happen was they'd get the slate of animated features and they'd just dump them on their kids and be like, what do you like? And that's how Cars 2 wins an Oscar, kind of thing. That's how all the Pixar movies win Oscars over and over and over again. Not that they're not good, but they're not functioning on the same level as something like another Oscar winner, which is Spirited Away. Spirited Away is one of the rare Oscar winners, and they did that for a weird reason, which we'll get to. Partially for a weird reason that we'll get to. And I'm not saying that, believe me, I'm not saying the Oscars are perfect. The Oscars routinely screws it up and routinely does not pick the most popular or best movie for Film of the Year. But I don't think that their goal is to pick the best or most popular. I think their goal is to pick something different than that, and we'll get to that in a second. And we'll get to that when talking about anime in particular. But suffice it to say, they have some sort of closed, insular, communal voting. And that only happens at the nomination level for the Anime Awards. And from what I've gathered about the Anime Awards, the nomination process is pretty messy. It's just pretty messy. And what ends up happening is you start the popularity contest first at all, but also way too early, because there's tons of people who are judges for the Anime Awards. A lot of people. And there's also a lot of people who are judges for the Oscars and the Emmys and all of it. But from what I've heard time and time again, people haven't seen enough stuff, people aren't considering enough stuff, people are really staying in their own lane, people are not lashing out and being like, well, I know I'm a shonen action person, but what do I think about Cinderella Grey? What do I think about all these other things that are out there? And then the thing about the Oscars, and the thing about many of the other, basically all the other, with the exception of Teen Choice and People's Choice Awards, which are what they sound like, the Oscars and the Grammys and the Emmys have little, if any, even the MTV Movie and Music Awards, have little, if any, public voting. The MTV Movie Awards have it, but it's its own thing. You can vote. We'll give you a popularity contest, a true unbridled popularity contest, where you can rig it and do whatever you want. That's in the corner, that's its own award, whatever. The Oscars and the Emmys and the Grammys don't have these things for a reason. And that's even before you get to the fact that people can vote multiple times, which is its own insane problem. They don't have those things because it removes some of the shine of the prestige part of it. Because as soon as you have a general voting situation, you have a popularity contest. You have you have people fighting for what they like the best, not what they believe was the most arresting or most, that or the other thing of the year. You have people fighting for things like, this is how you end up with I think the first Anime Award was it's infamously known as the Yuri on Ice Awards. That Yuri on Ice swept that awards because of the popularity contest, and at the time that was the most popular thing. The previous Anime Awards, from the one that just happened, was the Solo Leveling Awards. Because Solo Leveling Season 2 just ended, so even though they were voting for Solo Leveling Season 1, it was still in the system of people who were voting. So people were voting for the thing they like. Not even the season of the thing they like, just the thing they like. And you only make that worse by giving people multiple votes. And I'm loath to give solutions for this, but I would posit the solution you could do for this is you could say, you want to vote? Great. Put in your email. And every time somebody votes, they put in their email. If they come back, they have their ballot saved under their email. It's a little, almost, not like a Crunchyroll membership, but almost a little profile. And that's attached to your email. And if you want to make multiple emails to vote, you can certainly do that. That's a lot of work. But it's just a little bit of friction in between showing up and just clicking the boxes and going through it. That way everybody gets one vote. That brings it down from a crazy popularity contest level to just people being like, no, these are my votes. This is my vote for this year. Done. That way you're not like, oh well, Solo Leveling got 200,000 votes, but only 100,000 people vote. Only 50,000 people voted, and they voted for it 4 times. That's not fair. That's not the way any popularity contest on the planet should ever work. But what should be happening is stuff gets nominated, and then stuff is voted on by a closed circle of people. And that circle of people can be a couple thousand people. But it should be a closed circle of people who are considered knowledgeable in the industry. Big deal. Essentially, what the Crunchyroll Awards has as a nominating process should be the voting process, either also or instead. That would solve the problem of both prestige, and it would bolster the other two pieces. The other problem with the Crunchyroll Awards, the last problem now. By the way, this is probably going to be a shorter one of these than normal because this is a smaller topic than just like a whole show like I usually talk about. But the last problem is, I think, the biggest problem, where I think the whole thing falls apart for the Crunchyroll Awards. And that is publicity. The thing about the Oscars, and the thing about the Grammys, and the thing about all the award shows, is they are big shows that are put on for an audience. which makes the Grammys is an incredible award show because it's essentially a big old concert they throw every year. Same thing with the MTV Music Awards, and to a degree the MTV Movie Awards. These were big things that were ticketed, that they fill up like the Staples Event Center or whatever, the Staples Arena or whatever, and they put on a show, and people can sit and watch it, and they like root for their favorite movies, and all this other stuff, and they might learn about new movies here and there. I know that you can watch the Anime Awards, but they moved it from LA, which was already a weird time thing for the East Coast, to Japan a couple years ago. And now it's on they do broadcast it live, but it's live at 4 a.m. in the morning in America. Who's that for? Who is sitting and watching the Anime Awards? I don't care who you are, at 4 in the morning. You're just not. And so, between the nominating and voting process, or not serving the nominees or award winners, and the publicity not serving the award winners or the viewing public, you're left with, who is this for? You got a fancy trophy from Crunchyroll. But then you just go back to work. Like, it goes on the shelf. And like, you don't... Of the three things I would fix for the Crunchyroll Awards is... And I told myself I wasn't going to do this, but here we are. Is the nominating and voting process need to be ironed out. The publicity of winners needs to be big and serious. When a show on Crunchyroll, or on Netflix, or on HIDIVE wins the Anime of the Year, because there have been shows across the spectrum always win awards, or wins some sort of awards, the Anime Awards, there needs to be an agreement that this show gets a gold badge, it gets featured for the next month, or month and a half, on whatever platform it's on, or on all the platforms it's on. It needs to get gold star treatment, because what I said about the Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse thing was really true. They did that digitally, but they also released a new edition of the film on Blu-ray and put it on shelves. And that's the thing you can't do, but you can replicate it by... And then lastly, the show needs to come back down to earth a little bit. And they need to be... I know it's difficult right now with all the ICE immigration bullshit that's happening. But it needs to be... If it's going to be for anime fans around the world, it needs to take advantage of... And you're going to do this as a publicity stunt for Crunchyroll, this American company, host in America, rent out an event space. They used to do this, and they stopped when they got Sony money. Surprise. Bring it here, close off, maybe give a couple public voting awards, but everybody only gets one vote. And close off the rest, make the voting more insular. So you have people that people consider knowledgeable voting on these awards. And I'm not putting myself up for this, believe me. But like, if someone, let's say Lindsay Loveridge from, I think the editor-at-large, I have her business card somewhere, but the editor-at-large for the Anime News Network says, this is a good and really interesting show. It deserves your attention. That has a lot more pull than if I do. Than if I say the same thing. Or at least I hope it does. If, say, Bennett the Sage really likes the show, that is more important, that has more weight than if a random hype YouTuber or hype TikToker says, I really like One Piece. Like, that's not a revolutionary thing. One Piece, I do know some of the things that won this year. One Piece as best continuing show does not strike me as, this is the best thing that kept going this year. It strikes me as, One Piece fans showed out for their show. And the scales, and they managed to get the scales tilted enough in their favor for this category. The fact that things like 100 Meters came out in the same year Demon Slayer, as the Demon Slayer movie, and the Demon Slayer movie won, that's insane. That's 4 to 6 episodes of a TV show crammed into one thing and pushed out into theaters, versus a theatrical animation that is incredibly artful and incredibly thoughtful in a way that Demon Slayer is an adaptation of a thing. And restricting the voting and bringing it closer in will help solve that. It will be painful. It will be really, like, you'll get a lot of belly aching from people, and you're just going to have to take it, because what will happen is the people who are belly aching will be served better by the award show, because you'll be pumping prestige back into it, and it will have authority in a way that it doesn't now. My Hero Academia winning Anime of the Year means nothing. It means that show ended this year, that it was the end of an era, but who cares? When I wrote my article about anime and Hollywood award shows, I said that they struggled with figuring out how to handle anime and long-formness of it, and they struggled with holding it up next to the stuff they're already considering. And this happened in the New York Times bestseller list, too. New York Times bestseller list is sectioned into literary books, meaning novels, that kind of stuff. And then comics, like Western comics, like trades, and then manga. And the reason that comics is separated out is just because the sheer amount of comics people buy just because they're buying trades, which are the floppies, is just so much more than a book, and because they're so much cheaper than a novel would ever be. So that's a competitive thing. But manga, especially the tankobon versions, which is usually what we buy in America, a single volume of manga can be so much more popular than anything else on the list that it just doesn't, like, to put them all together, manga would be at the top of the charts at all times. It's just the way it works. It's also a little bit there are multiple volumes of manga to a story in the way that there are multiple floppies to a story. But it's just imbalanced. And so instead of sitting there and considering manga in the same way as they consider novels, they section it off. This also happened to comics. That happens with animated films in general, but then extends to anime. So I understand why Crunchyroll and why everybody wanted an award show for anime. Because you can sit and you can consider the nuances of the medium in a whole different way that way. But once again, and the biggest problem here is that they have created a pure popularity contest. They've created an affirmation of what everybody already knows. Oh, Solo Leveling popular? The current big shonen power fantasy thing is popular? Cool. I didn't need a whole night of razzle-dazzle to tell me that. And I didn't, like, if you're going to have a situation like My Hero, you don't give My Hero the opportunity to be Anime of the Year. No matter how good or bad the last season is, you give it Best Ending Series, or you give it its own award, or you give it its own honors. You find the Oscars and other award shows figure out ways to do this all the time. You say, it's great, this is a really good show, a lot of people love it, we get that. We have a thing for it over here. We're not going to let it take over big award of the night. Because that's probably the moment when everybody got wise to being pretty screwed up, is when The Martian won, the Matt Damon trapped on movie from a bunch of years back, won for Best Comedy. And it was pretty clear to everybody at that point that they just wanted The Martian to win something. They wanted to give it an award, but they couldn't figure out how to do it, so they nominated it for Best Comedy, and it just that screwed up the chances of other better comedies than The Martian is. Not better movies than The Martian, but better comedies specifically, winning that category that year. Or being nominated for that category that year. I don't remember I know it was nominated. I think it won, but I'm not entirely 100% sure. But something like they did with My Hero this year. It discounts all the other incredible shows that started this year and deserve recognition. Like, I know called Speed Hero was not nominated at all. That's a new anime that I watched that was incredible, that have done really well to have earned an award or even a nomination. That would tell people, hey, this thing is out there, it's incredible, it's all dubbed, go watch it. Not just old weirdos on the internet like me. But they chose to give My Hero kind of billing this year. And I understand how that happened. Once again, we go all the way back to the nomination process. Enough of the people who are judges kind of up on My Hero, love that show rightfully, don't have a problem with people loving that show, and so put it up for nomination in Anime of the Year. Like, of course this is going to be Anime of the Year. It's its last season. It deserves it. No, it doesn't mean anything. A show ending, no matter how good it is, does not mean that it automatically deserves an award. This is, like, I sound real old here. None of the awards you give people can, in an award show that means something, and that you're telling people outwardly that means something, can be a participation trophy. And, of course, there are categories I would probably get rid of, like the protect at all costs character categories, gone. Like that, yeah, from Family had won that like 3 years in a row. It's no longer a real category. Get rid of it. I understand why it's there. I understand it's a like moe blob anime thing, but it's not functioning correctly, clearly. So get rid of it. And those are really my thoughts on it, because I find myself, like, remember the first time I saw the Anime Awards, I was like, oh, this is really interesting and cool, but it feels like they could use some work. And now that we're years into it, it still needs a lot of work. And on award shows lately, and I understand that, and believe me, I understand the lowering on the Oscars in particular. I remember specifically when I was still in middle school, probably high school, my mom was obsessed, and still is a little obsessed with what's Oscar nominated. Lots of people are, and that's part of the reason why it pays to just be nominated for the Oscars. If people just go see a movie based on that. And that's what made like ripping apart the interior of the Anime Awards just then. What was trying to get back to that level of authority for the Anime Awards as a thing. We went to go see The Artist, I think it was called, and it's a stunningly bad movie. But it's a movie about movies, and if there's one thing the Oscars love, it's movies about movies. That's why I think, what's the one with Josh Brolin, won an Oscar. And that's why every once in a while you get movies that are about a very particular time period of movie making. Babylon is a perfect example. That movie feels like it's trying for an Oscar so hard. But I don't think I ever got one. But you have to, those things still exist as authorities in a world where monoculture is pretty gone. But hilariously, as soon as you give people a popularity contest, there is a kind of way in which it rears its head. And those are my thoughts on the Anime Awards. More of a rant than thoughts, but that's where I'm going to leave it.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you liked the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.